Welcome to Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reid. I think of the journey of life as a road that we're driving down. We get to speed up on the straightaways, ease back on the curves, and I don't know about you, but I've certainly had the obstacle in the roadway that I never expected to see, and I had to either slam my brakes on or swerve to avoid hitting it. But whether we're talking about our careers or relationships or even just managing through life's phases, life is all about shifting and moving from one place to another. The challenge is that sometimes, in trying to get from where we were to where we want to be, we can get stuck while we're trying to shift. And we land in what I call the neutral space, where we're applying old ways of thinking to new situations. Join me and some incredibly inspiring guests as we talk about what it takes to shift into gear and get to where you want to be. Because here's the deal, if you're sitting in neutral, you're going nowhere. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond Neutral. Today's episode is a feedback episode where I talk about some of the conversations that I've had up until now and kind of reflect back on how some of the insights that my guests might have offered can apply to you in everyday life, in either the situation that they explained or in other situations that you may be experiencing. So I wanted to talk for a little bit about the conversation I had with Carrie Shigetomi. As you may recall, if you heard the episode, and if you didn't, you want to tune in. Carrie is the Senior Vice President of Product Development for leather goods and ready-to-wear at Coach. Really huge job. And she's an incredibly inspirational leader, having accomplished an enormous amount in her career and having influenced a lot of people in their careers. I know Carrie because I have worked with her as a client, both as a candidate that was being considered for some roles in her career, and as well as having filled some roles for her in executive search. And one of the things that is always the case is when I'm working on a project for her, she's so well known and so well regarded that I can call a candidate and say, do you know Carrie? And most of the time, anybody who's known her says, oh my gosh, she's phenomenal. I loved working for her, or I've heard tremendous things about her. So it was just great to be able to talk with her a little bit about her journey and her insights on leadership and her insights on what she sees is important for people to keep in mind as they are looking to lead or as they're looking to advance their careers. So one of the things that she said that I thought was significant, I asked her a question about what advice she would give to her younger self. And she shared the thought that you're enough, that she wishes people would realize that they are enough as they are. And it's such an amazing piece of insight. And I think something that all of us struggle with in one way or another at different times in our lives. And that concept of being enough is really, for me, is really about embracing who you are and not being limited by who you are. So the example that she gave was a colleague or a team member saying to her, I could never be in a leadership position like you're in because I'm an introvert. And she's carrying that badge of being an introvert as being limited. Okay. So Carrie's point is, well, that doesn't mean that you can't be a leader. It means you bring a different perspective or a different style to leadership, and that every team needs diversity in it, right? We think about diversity and we think of that around gender or sexual orientation or race, but diversity is also personality types. And so the idea for me of being enough is we have a tendency, many people have a tendency, I've done this, of kind of giving ourselves these labels or these identities and using that as a reason why things are the way they are, or sometimes why they can't change. And being enough is really about stepping into who you are and understanding it and embracing it. So in the example of an introvert, I can't be a leader of a large team because I'm introverted. Not true. First of all, introversion and extroversion are around social energy. They're not values that are better or worse. They are insights into what it takes for us to regain energy or recover. Okay. So extroverts, if you think about a long, hard week of work, okay, and you're exhausted by the end of the week, an extrovert wants to go out with a group of people and have a really good time and socialize because that's how they renew their energy. An introvert likely wants to either go home by themselves and have a quiet night, or they might want to spend time with one person, having a one-on-one conversation, or two people, but a smaller group, because they refuel, their energy comes back from a little bit more solitude than an extrovert's energy. That's what introversion versus extroversion really means, okay? It's not about whether or not you like to socialize. You can be an extrovert with social anxiety. Quite frankly, you can be an introvert with social anxiety. That's not what they're reflecting. The challenge is that sometimes, and I see this especially when people have had personality evaluations done, like a Myers-Briggs is an example of it. Even Hogan profiles are an example of it. Or anytime they've had an assessment done, and there's these boxes or these categories that they believe they fit in. That then becomes, oh, this is who I am. Okay, that's part of who you are. The question is, what are the behaviors or the habits that you need to develop in order to leverage the strength of who you are and minimize any negative impact that can be having on your performance? And it's really important, right? And to not be labeled by it as an absolute. There aren't absolutes. The point of life is to grow and to learn, right? To grow and to learn and to evolve and to really become the person you truly want to become. So if you're truly an introvert, it doesn't mean that you need to become a person who gets energized by being out socially. But it also doesn't mean that you can't lead a group of people or that you can't speak in front of a group of people. Speaking in front of a group of people is a skill you need to develop. Even as an introvert, you can still go home and re-energize. It may exhaust you to do it, but you can do it and you can be an effective leader. There's a great book out called The Power of an Introvert. I can't remember who wrote it, but I'll circle back on that. I'll put it in the show notes. But really knowing that and understanding that. And I think about a couple of coaching clients that I've had around this. And here's a prime example of it. I had a coaching client, newly appointed CEO, who in the tech industry, who talked about a frustration and a lack of confidence that she had because she didn't feel like she could come up with answers really quickly. And she labeled herself a slow thinker. She said, the challenge is I'm a slow thinker. And when I don't have a response right away, I get anxious about that and tend to stumble. And it was creating a challenge for her from a confidence standpoint, because she was lacking confidence in those moments where she felt like she needed to have a fast response in order to be an effective leader. So there was her label. I'm a slow thinker. Negative. And usually our labels tend to be negative, right? They tend to think about, we tend to label ourselves in how we're limited. All right. We don't always label ourselves in the power that we have, but this was a great example. I'm a slow thinker. So as we talked about and as we went through a coaching session, we talked about shifting her mindset from being a slow thinker. And I said to her, boy, I've listened to you, I've talked to you. I don't, that doesn't strike me as slow. Feels like you're putting a negative on that. I'm curious if it's possibly that you're a deep thinker or you're a broad thinker. What would it feel like to think of it that way? And it was like this moment of really realizing that what she's doing in those moments, okay, of somebody speaking is really listening intently and considering all the implications of that conversation and considering what her ideas are on related to that. But she's switching that to I'm a slow thinker, when in fact, she's really thinking about the implications of the conversation. So one of the things we worked on was getting a pause in place. In other words, when she's feeling like she needs to respond but isn't prepared to turn down the anxiety in that, to simply say, I need to think about this for a moment to really craft my response or to really solidify my ideas. And offer that, acknowledge that I think broadly, I think deeply, and I want to respond effectively, having really been comfortable with the thoughts I've put together. And so it's not about changing the fact that she's a deep listener and that she really thinks things through thoroughly. By the way, that's called a thinking introvert. You think inside your mind, okay? And you think things through thoroughly. And then offering your response. And just reframing that characteristic of her personality from I'm a slow thinker, which nobody wants to think of themselves as a slow thinker, right? To I'm a deep thinker or I'm a broad thinker, allowed this to be a positive. And then creating a placeholder from needing like she needs to speak into acknowledging that she wants to think, forged a pathway for her to go forward in a really effective way. And so I think that it's really important to step back and consider the label that you're putting on yourself and ask yourself how it's serving you. How are you being served by thinking about yourself that way? What is the real benefit that you offer by being who you are? In this case, that's who she is. She's never going to be the person with the quick quips and the jaunting responses. It's not who she is. It's not who she has to be. Any of us who have sat in meetings with a lot of people will absolutely appreciate the person who doesn't speak a lot, but when they do, has incredibly meaningful things to offer. And I can think of a board that I sit on, and there's this one board member who sits in the meetings and thinks and very rarely speaks, as others are bantering about on a topic. But when he raises his hand to speak, the words he says are incredibly meaningful. And I can tell you that the people in the room listen incredibly intently to what he says because he doesn't speak often. So being an introvert is not a negative, and it is not something that prevents you from also being a great leader. That is not an either or proposition. That is an and. I am an introvert and I am a very good leader. And that is because I am a very good listener. And I think about my responses carefully before I speak. And we can go on and on with a list of ands that can go with identifying that you are a person who recharges your energy by being in a small group or in solitude. Nothing wrong with that. So I loved Carrie's perspective that you need to own who you are and realize that you are enough. I am an introvert and it is enough to make me a good leader. Doesn't mean you don't have other things to work on. It doesn't mean that you don't have to develop those skills really well. You do. But it does mean that that label that you've put on yourself is not limiting. And I think that is just such a really, really important thing for us to step back and think about. How are you labeling yourself? What are the labels you're putting on yourself? And how is that impacting you? Are you benefiting from that label? Or is that label really preventing you from being able to identify the skills that you need to develop in order to move forward? And those are two really different things. So that's some insight from the conversation that I had with Carrie. If you missed that for some reason, you missed that episode, please go back and listen to it, because she had some other really interesting things to say around the importance of leading from a we perspective, leading your team from the perspective of we, and putting I aside, and the language that you use in doing that being very indicative of what your orientation is in that when you're interviewing for a job. So her point was, when she interviews people who are going to lead a team, she looks for how they talk about the successes that their team has had. Do they look at it as, we as a team created this? Or do they look at it as, I led my team to do this? And in Carrie's estimation, that's a really good indicator of a leadership style and a way of involving your team and looking to what the greater good is. And she looks for that in an interview process. So absolutely worth listening to. That is my feedback for the day. It's just a little snippet here about insights that were gained from my conversation with Carrie Shigetomi. And so I want to leave you with, lean into who you are, enjoy who you are, appreciate who you are, and bring the best of who you are to every situation. And if you need help developing that or really grounding in that, then find a coach to help you do that. That's my episode. Beyond Neutral, what do you need to do to shift from where you are today to where you want to be? Keep driving. See you next time. Hey, thanks so much for joining us this week on Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reid. Make sure to visit our website, www.reidandco.com, for this week's show notes. And if you found value in today's episode, I would appreciate you giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. All of this helps to support the show. Have a great week.